Hey, this is Dr. Mark Whitlock, pastor of Reed Temple AME Church right here in Glendale, Maryland. Welcome to Reed Temple, the James A. Parker Lay Organization Social Action Committee Candidates Forum. It's today that we have an opportunity to share your views, to share your points of interest, to share your thoughts about the future of Prince George's County. We are excited that you're here. We look forward to hearing you with bated breath. Let's have a great time today. Let's reshape, let's remodel, and let's reinvent ourselves here in Prince George's County. God bless.
Greetings and welcome to today's program. Welcome to the 2022 Candidates Forum, sponsored by the James A. Parker Lay Organization Social Action Committee. This is your opportunity to meet the candidates and ask questions. We have hosted a series of candidate forums. The forum today, you will meet the candidates for Attorney General and Governor. This is your opportunity to ask them about their platforms and make an informed choice about voting. So please remember to vote, register to vote, absentee ballot, or show up on election day. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the program.
Good afternoon, Reed Temple family. My name is Nikki Thompson, member of the James A. Parker Lay Organization Social Action Committee. And this afternoon, I have the joy of introducing our moderator for this candidate forum, Ms. Tonia Wellens, the CEO of the Greater Washington Community Foundation, which is truly apt given her extensive work in spearheading community engagement and impact initiatives, not only here in the county, not only here in the state, but across the region. Her reputation truly precedes her, and so it is again my joy to turn it over to Ms. Tonia Wellens.
Thank you, Nikki, for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it, and it is my absolute pleasure to be with you today to serve as your moderator. I want to acknowledge Ms. Lynette Crosby and you, Nikki, and to all of the members of the Lay Organization Social Action Committee at Reed Temple for doing the important work of voter education and for demonstrating civic leadership. Many in our country fought hard for us to be able to vote, and so we mustn't take this responsibility lightly. The Black church, for many of us, has been the center of so many movements, but especially the movement for civil rights for Black people and for all people in this country. So I appreciate how we are continuing to carry on this tradition. I think for the last few years, it has been clearly demonstrated for us the importance of voting and how it can lock in decisions that are made today for decades to come. So I want to start us off by thanking all of the candidates who are participating with us today. We really appreciate your time and your attention. And please know that we also appreciate your decision to participate in our democracy in this way. And so now we'll transition to just a few slides around just sort of general voter education. As a reminder, to vote by mail, you must request a mail-in ballot from the State Board of Education of your local board. Your request for a mail-in ballot for the gubernatorial primary election must be received by July 12th and by November 1 for the gubernatorial general election. Mail-in ballots must be postmarked or placed in a designated ballot drop box by 8 p.m. on July 19th, 2022 for the primary election and 8 p.m. November 8th for the gubernatorial general election. To vote in person, Marylanders can vote early or on election day. Early voting will be held for 8 days for the primary, July 7th through July 14th. And for the primary election, that's for the primary election, and for the general election, October 27th through November 3rd. You can vote early at any of the voting centers in the county you live in. The primary election day is July 19th, and general election day is November 8th. To vote in person on election days, please go to your assigned polling places. So what is a primary election? A primary election is an election used to narrow the field of candidates of a given elective office or to determine the nominees for political parties in advance of a general election. Primary elections can take several different forms. In a partisan or closed primary, voters select a candidate to be a political party's nominee for a given office in the corresponding general election. Maryland is a closed primary state. Voters must affiliate formally with a political party in advance of the election date to participate in that party's primary. Generally, only registered voters affiliated with the Democratic or Republican parties may vote in that party's primary election. You must be registered with either the Democratic or Republican Party to vote in the primary election. If there are nonpartisan offices that are elected in a primary election, for example, the school board, any voter can vote for these offices. If you do not select a political party or your voter registration application, you will be unaffiliated with any political party. That means that you will generally not be able to vote in a primary election, but you will be able to vote for any nonpartisan primary elections held in your jurisdiction, such as a primary election to select nominees for the Board of Education. So we're going to transition now to our candidates forum. We're going to start with the Office of the Attorney General. The Attorney General is the chief legal officer of the state. The Attorney General's office has general charge and supervision and direction of the legal business of the state, acting as legal advisors and representatives of the major agencies, various boards, commissions, and officials, and institutions of state government. In all matters in which the state of Maryland are involved, the Attorney General and Assistant Attorney Generals represent the state. This includes litigation in the Court of Appeals, the Court of Special Appeals, Circuit Courts, District Court of Maryland, as well as the Supreme Court of the United States and the United States Courts of Appeal and the United States District Court. Administrative rules and regulations promulgated by most state officers or agencies must be submitted to the Attorney General for review before they become effective. The Office of the Attorney General also enforces the state's antitrust, consumer protection and securities laws, and conducts criminal prosecutions and appeals. The office is the legal advisor to virtually every agency in each of the three branches of state government. I want to share that all candidates were invited to participate in today's forum. Only one Republican candidate for Attorney General responded to our invitation. And so that candidate has sent a recorded message. And now, as we begin, you will hear from Jim Schalek, Republican Party candidate for Attorney General.
Thank you. My name is Jim Schalek, and I'm running to be your next Attorney General. I'm running for three reasons to be Attorney General. One, to reduce crime. Two, to reduce crime. And three, to reduce crime. That is my priority. And I know some of you may be saying, well, here's another guy that knows how to reduce crime. Well, let me tell you first about my background. I know how to do this. I moved to Maryland 32 years ago to work in the Justice Department as a prosecutor. Before that, I came from New York City. I grew up on the Lower East Side of New York. I was an assistant district attorney in the Bronx, New York, my first job, for 12 years. 10 of those years, I was in the Homicide Bureau, handling murders and manslaughters and homicide cases in the Bronx. No better place to learn how to be a prosecutor than in the Bronx, New York. We had about 50,000 arrests a year, over 400 murders. No better place to learn how to be a prosecutor. And I did that. I was promoted to chief of the Homicide Bureau, and I spent 3 years in that job supervising about 20 lawyers, about 80 detectives in the prosecution investigation of over 400 murders a year. I prosecuted David Berkowitz, the son of Sam Killer, for 3 murders he committed in the Bronx. I know evil, and I've seen it face to face. I know the sound. I know the sound a mother makes when I had to tell her that her child was murdered. So I've been in the trenches. I know how to prosecute and who has to be prosecuted. After that, I was an assistant attorney general in New York, and then I moved here to work in the Justice Department. Well, what am I going to do? Well, the Attorney General's office is an army, 450, 460 lawyers, another 500-600 non-lawyers, investigators, clerks, etc. That's an army. And I'm going to use that army to help fight crime. Around the state, each county has a state's attorney. I'm going to create a major offense bureau in the Attorney General's office, maybe about 40 lawyers, maybe 10% of the office. The rest of the functions of the Attorney General's office will be in good hands, and all those endeavors will be fulfilled successfully. But priority has to be fighting crime. Baltimore City, over 300 murders a year. Montgomery County, murder rate is up. You go into a courtroom in some of these big counties, maybe there's 60 cases, 50 cases, and maybe 48 of the 50 will be plea bargained, dismissed, or postponed. No good. We've got to carve out, my people, my attorney generals will go into these counties to assist or replace state's attorneys that don't have the manpower, are overwhelmed with caseloads, or don't have the will to carve out these most violent and repeat offenders. Repeat offenders too. You steal your 14th car, time to go to jail. So we're going to go in, attorney generals, to counties, pick up the most violent and repeat offenders. No plea bargaining. No deals. The worst of the worst will be carved out of the system, and we prosecute them for the most serious jail sentence we can get from a judge. That's how you fight crime. You take the worst of the worst off the street, one by one. It sounds like a small step, but you make a lot of small steps, and you've got a big step against the career criminal element in our state. It sends a message also that in Maryland, you're violent and you're a repeat offender, you're going to go to jail. And we're going to do that. It's not complicated. Now, I'm not Attila the Hun. Young kids, first offenders, nonviolent, small amounts of drugs, nonviolent thefts. We're not talking about jail. We're talking about diversion. Get these kids, men, boys and girls, out of the system. No jail for them. Community service, therapy, drug counseling, things that divert them from jail. We don't want young people in jail unless they commit, horrible crimes. So that's going to be the priority of my office, fighting crime and assisting or replacing state's attorneys around the state. The rest of our functions, representing the state agencies, going after environmental violations, election law violations, we're going to do. We're still going to have over 400 lawyers doing all that other work. But the priority I have, and none of the other candidates for Attorney General have what I'm saying as a priority. Lots of lip service, but mine is a priority. And I'm hoping that you will consider my candidacy and vote for me on July 19th, primary day. I certainly appreciate your attention to this. And believe me, if I'm elected, you're going to have me 100%, 24/7, trying to reduce crime in Maryland. So thank you for listening to me. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shellek. Now I'd like to invite to the stage for opening statements, Anthony Brown, followed by Katie Curran O'Malley. Mr. Brown.
Excellent. And please remind me how much time I have.
Opening statements are 2 minutes. So just brief 2-minute introduction with your opening statement, and then we'll go into the questions. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first of all, let me I want to thank your senior pastor, Mark Whitlock. An honor to be able to visit Reed Temple AME over the many years that I've served in public office. While I was born and raised Catholic, I feel as if I'm an AME myself. But I'm running for Attorney General. I have nearly 3 decades as a lawyer, state government, state court, federal court, trial court, appellate court, class action, lawsuits, big commercial litigation, the kind of cases that come before the Attorney General's office. I also have experiences that range from a colonel and generals in providing legal services to soldiers and their families, to 3 terms in the United States Congress with 16 years in Annapolis, executive leadership experience as lieutenant governor, where I understand the client, which is the state, and also years in the legislative body, both in Annapolis and in Congress, where I understand the more important client, which are the people of Maryland. I think Maryland's a great state, but I also believe that far too many barriers exist for far too many Marylanders. We see this in healthcare and housing. We see it in education, in the environment, in the workplace, in policing, and in the criminal justice system, which quite frankly is broken, where judges are incarcerating black men, young black men, at the highest rate of any state in the country. We have more black men as a percentage of our prison population, a juvenile justice system that's broken. So I'm running for Attorney General to eliminate those barriers, to make government work for all Marylanders, and to fight for the changes that will protect every person and empower every community. My priorities are the people's priorities. So whether we're addressing climate change or environmental justice, defending against a women's right to choose, whether we're protecting voting rights, workers' rights, or rights of the LGBTQIA plus community. I'm going to be the people's lawyer, fighting for fairness and equity, and every position I take and decision I make will be through a lens of fairness and equity. Thank you for having us for the forum today, and I look forward to answering your questions and participating in the conversation.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Brown. We really appreciate your opening remarks. And now I'd like to introduce Ms. Katie Curran O'Malley.
Thank you, Tanea, and I want to thank everyone at Reed Temple Church and the James A. Parker Lay Organization Social Action Committee for organizing this great forum. I am Katie Curran O'Malley, and I'm a lifelong Marylander and a lifelong Democrat. I'm a mom of 4 wonderful kids, and I've been married for the past 30 years. But while I've been a mother for the past 31 years, I've also been an active public servant. I have served as an assistant state's attorney for a decade in Baltimore County, where I tried hundreds of cases in front of judges and juries. And then for the past 20 years, I've been sitting in Baltimore City as a district court judge, where I have presided over thousands of cases not just involving our criminal justice system, but also our civil laws. I did a lot of work as a prosecutor in the area of domestic violence. And then when I transitioned and became a judge, I was one of 2 judges across the state that trained all of the new judges on best practices in domestic violence. And sadly, we've seen such an increase in domestic violence cases over these years, and especially during the pandemic because of isolation issues. But all this experience matters because the Attorney General is the leader of approximately 400 some lawyers as well as support staff. And these lawyers go to work every single day working and defending Marylanders when it comes to public safety and criminal justice reform. Listen, I've been in the criminal justice system. I know what works and I know what doesn't work. And I've had police officers actually lie under oath in my courtroom and nothing was done about it. So I understand where we need to get to work when it comes to accountability and transparency in our policing. And I also understand why we need police to keep communities safe and why we must, in fact, give the police officers the resources, the men and women who go to work every day to protect our communities, the resources that they need to protect our communities, at the same time making them transparent and accountable. You know, the other great things that attorney generals do is they protect our environment. And there's so much inequality when it comes to environmental justice around our state. Certain areas of the state are more heavily polluted, especially in our urban areas. Where I grew up in Baltimore City, we take a brunt of the pollution here, especially in the lower income neighborhoods. So we need to make sure that we are working hand in hand with the lawyers and with the General Assembly to pass laws for environmental justice for all of our communities across the state. The other area the AG works on, and I know very well, is consumer protection. Our consumers right now are facing many, many issues when it comes to rising prices and inflation. And we need to make sure that these companies that are price gouging are really held accountable for that. So these are areas that I will be working on as your next Attorney General. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everybody here this afternoon and look forward to the questions.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Katie. So now I want to bring both of our candidates to the conversation. And I am just really excited about some of the questions that our colleagues have put together to get us going. So let's just go ahead and get started. The Attorney General's office can seek and support student loan forgiveness. What is your stance on student loan forgiveness, and do you have any plans to further support it for Maryland residents?
Which order are we going?
Why don't we start with you, Mr. Brown, since you piped up first, and then we'll alternate.
Yeah, look, I think records matter because I think records indicate what your values are and what your priorities are. And I supported student loan forbearance during the pandemic and urged President Biden, who has the authority today to forgive up to $50,000 worth of loans per student under federal guaranteed loans. I'm a sponsor and have voted for student loan forgiveness proposals on Capitol Hill. So while we haven't been successful because we've been blocked by Republicans, I do think it's important that records reflect what your values and your priorities are. As Attorney General, while student loan forgiveness is not within the authority, there's an important role that the Attorney General plays. And I think that's in ensuring that you don't have predatory lenders who are preying on those students, often Black and brown students, who take out greater debt to go to college than any other students. I know recently Brian Frosh settled a case with a student lender, a student loan lender, who was, essentially preying on Marylanders, defrauding them. The other thing I would do, I've done it on Capitol Hill, and as Attorney General, I'll pay very close attention to, are the loans that are going to students who are attending our for-profit schools. Many of the for-profit schools provide a valuable service. They really do. But where we do see deceptive practices among higher educational institutions more often, it's in those for-profit schools. They make promises. Students take out loans. Those promises are not fulfilled. And then students are saddled with tremendous debt. And we know for Black and brown students, one of the biggest barriers that we have to building wealth, to buying that first home, to saving for our children's developmental opportunities, whether it's summer camp or anything else, is because we're paying student loans at a higher rate and higher levels than anyone else. So my record is clear and demonstrates that I'll be doing everything I can as Attorney General. Where I have the authorities, I'll use them. And where I don't, I'll go to the General Assembly to get those authorities to make sure that we're protecting student borrowers in Maryland.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. Is O'Malley, over to you. Can't hear you. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Absolutely.
So do we get a minute to answer the questions? Because I know that there's nobody really keeping track of it.
That's right. So it's a minute, but why don't you take a minute and a half just to get your full answer out, and then all the other questions, it'll be a minute each.
Thanks for
Sure.
So I know a lot about student loans. I have to tell you, because I was took out student loans myself back in the day, and I ended up paying them off by the time I was 50. So that was 9 years ago. That's how long it took me to pay off my student loans. And my kids have taken student loans as well. And so I understand how hard it is for people who get out of college, who get out of schools after college, to pay off those loans. And I was really excited when President Biden campaigned on eliminating some student debt for our youngsters who are getting out of colleges and at schools afterwards, because it really is a huge burden on them getting, the jobs that they need, sometimes having 2 jobs. And I know, because I actually worked 2 jobs so that I could pay off my student loans, while I was still in law school. So it's important that we have an attorney general that understands that from a personal level, but also understands how the court systems can go after the predatory lenders as well as deceptive practices when it comes in the student loans. I think what we need to do when we're talking about the forgiveness, though, is to make sure it's equitable. Because if we're going to be doing student loan forgiveness, we need to look at those who are most at need and come up with measured means of giving the loan forgiveness to individuals who aren't coming out of school and getting jobs making $200,000 a year. It has to be done in an equitable way so that individuals who are coming out of schools and have these heavy burdens who are not making that kind of income are the ones that are really getting a measured student loan forgiveness, so that we're not just throwing money in areas where people don't need it. So I really believe that it needs to be done in an equitable way. So again, thank you for the question. I think it's really something that's real important to so many people across our state here. And especially, I know, because my kids are all carrying some student loan burdens right now.
Absolutely. Thank you both for those responses. So our second question, the pandemic residential foreclosure moratorium has ended in Maryland and in Prince George's County. Prince George's County has the highest rate of foreclosures in the state. Can you talk about how you might address this issue specifically? Let's start with you, Ms. O'Malley.
Important issues that face individuals right now, where they're going to get housing. And I know from being in Baltimore City, where I sat in landlord-tenant court, that it's so important that we have affordable and safe and hazard-free housing for individuals, free of lead paint, free of any other hazards, free of making sure that there's heating and air conditioning. And that's been an issue that I've worked on for the past 20 years in landlord-tenant court, to make sure that our residents here in the city are getting what they bargained for when they go into housing, whether it's renting or when you're purchasing. So when it comes to the Attorney General and areas where the Attorney General can be effective in housing, is to make sure that the landlord-tenant laws are certainly fair and balanced. I know that there's been attempts now to get the Attorney General, or actually not the Attorney General, but to get the filing fees for landlords when they're trying to do evictions, to get the filing fees raised so that the monies that are raised from that filing fee increase will then go to individuals who come to court for evictions so that they have counsel. When it comes to foreclosures, that's a whole different thing. And so we need to make sure in the Consumer Protection Division that people's mortgages are fair, that the interest rates are fair, and that there aren't any deceptive practices being used. And that all can happen through the Consumer Protection Division, where they have many people working day in and day out to answer questions about those issues.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate your response. Mr. Brown.
Yep, here I am. Sure. And again, I think record matters. It's a reflection of your values on Capitol Hill. I fought for funding in the pandemic relief to make sure that, first, we had a foreclosure moratorium, and second, that we had dollars available to those tenants who simply could not afford to pay the rent because their restaurant was shut down or their workplace was shut down. And I think record matters. It shows, what your priorities are. As Attorney General, there are a number of things that I would do. I too would support legislation that when someone's in landlord-tenant court, because always the landlords are always represented. They most often are. They've got deeper pockets, and the tenants are. I support legislation in Maryland that provides representation to tenants and actually a fund so that those tenants who cannot afford representation, which is the lion's share, will have access to a publicly funded representation in that proceeding. The other thing that I support is just cause evictions. I think that if you're in a landlord-tenant agreement, and even when your lease expires, your lease should be automatically extended unless there are a narrow set of criteria that the landlord could meet to not extend your lease. Because whether you're a renter or a property owner, like, your home is where, that's your life. That's where you are. You need the protections as an attorney general.
So we're going to go ahead to the next question. It seems like we may have lost the last part of Mr. Brown's answer, but I think the next question is actually in the same vein, and it has to do with home appraisals. And we know that they have the tendency, especially in Black and Brown communities, to be discriminatory and to have an underlying element of racism, especially in Prince George's County. And I'd love to hear your stance on any policies or plans to address the issue of the discriminatory practices and the resulting impact on home appraisals. So why don't we bring up Ms. O'Malley to get us going here.
Tanea. So I know that issue has been present, and I know when I talk to realtors across the state that is an issue, especially when you talk about a property in Prince George's County and the same exact property in Montgomery County is appraised for, say, $1 million, and the exact property, square footage and everything, is underappraised in Prince George's. And there was a big investigation that was done through journalists. I think it needs to be done, a statewide investigation needs to be done through the Civil Rights Unit of the Attorney General's office, which right now can investigate these types of issues. However, the Civil Rights Division does not have the enforcement power. And I will use all of my advocacy that I've used in the past 30 years as working as a trial lawyer to go to the General Assembly and make sure that we get the adequate laws so that we can make sure that these appraising companies are not violating people's civil rights, but make sure that the Attorney General has the authority then to enforce civil rights violations here in the state. Right now, we don't. We have the ability to investigate. We have the ability to refer those cases to the right jurisdiction where the incident's happening, like in Prince George's, but we don't have the authority to use the enforcement power of the Attorney General to do that. And I think that needs to change, not just when it comes to these appraisers, but when it comes to education, when it comes to employment, when it comes to transportation issues, all of the different things where civil rights have been violated and people have been discriminated against. So it is an area that I'm well familiar about, and will be day one start working on that issue.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that response. I'm going to go ahead and repeat the question. It's related to home appraisals, which are known to be discriminatory, and especially in Prince George's County. We want to hear, Mr. Brown, your stance on the issue and any plans for programs, policies to address it.
Sure, and thank you. And I apologize again for my bad connection here on the Eastern Shore. This is like the 21st century of what we saw perpetrated against Black Americans last century when it came to redlining, not providing loans and mortgages for African Americans who wanted to move into certain neighborhoods.
So we're going to keep this conversation going. It's just, it's unfortunate, but internet matters. And so I'm hoping that Mr. Brown will be able to get to a spot where the Wi-Fi is a little bit stronger so that we can really, really hear his answers. And so I think it's just important that we continue to move this conversation along, and we'll create a space, hopefully, in the next few minutes for some additional responses. But I want to keep the conversation going. And Ms. O'Malley, you raised this in your opening remarks about environmental issues. And I want you to take a few moments, if you don't mind, to talk a little bit about some of the environmental issues that you expect to address in the state of Maryland, and what policies or programs we can look to, or what are some of the existing efforts that we need to hold violators responsible for, if you wouldn't mind.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
So it is a huge issue, you know, just like public safety. I mean, people want to be safe in their communities. We all want to make sure that when we turn the water on in our homes, that the drinking water is lead-free, that it's safe and it's accessible. We want to make sure that the air that we're breathing is not including contaminants that are causing cancer. And we want to make sure that the entire, you know, environment around us. And so it's something now that I'm so excited that our legislature has passed this last session called Climate Solutions Now Act, which is going to be bringing a whole bunch of reforms into the way we do things here in Maryland, as far as building buildings with energy grids that are electric, making electric buses available now, so that when the kids get on school buses, they're not breathing in all that diesel that comes from the school bus, which is certainly not healthy, especially for kids who have asthma or any other issues with their breathing, but just anyone. I mean, it's just common sense stuff that's making a huge difference with this act that just got passed. And it's going to take, you know, us up to 2045, where we'll have net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm really excited about that. As the next AG, I'm actually going to have a report card for the public so they can see what our actual measures are in reducing emissions, as well as cleaning up the Bay, which right now is off track by about 10 years. You know, back in 2010, there was a great bill that was passed by the governor at that time called the Chesapeake Clean Water Blueprint. And it was set up a whole way that we could reduce the sediment runoff that's going into the Bay, polluting our Bay, which is about 3,100 square miles of, that touches all of our lands. And all these communities that are near the Bay are subject to sea level rise. But by making a report card for the Attorney General to show public people in a public way where we're making the reductions, not only in the Bay, but also in the pollution in our air, because far too many people living in urban areas like myself take the brunt of pollution. And we need to spread that around with our zoning laws. We need to make sure that we're not putting an unfair burden of pollution in areas of lower income families. So these are all areas that I'm very excited about working on. And the environmental crimes unit does prosecute these cases for big polluters and small polluters. But right now there's only one lawyer and one investigator for the entire state. So I'd like to see that unit beefed up, because we have, a lot of area to cover. We have Western Maryland, the Eastern Shore, and our big cities. So it's it's a very important area, just right up there next to public safety.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you. I am just checking to see if Mr. Brown is back with us. I want to confirm that he is. Oh,
yeah.
Fantastic. And so we were shifting from the question around home appraisals, which you can touch on in the allocated time if you'd like, to the question around environmental issues, and what, if any, are your plans or policies to address environmental issues in the state, and what existing efforts would you continue to hold violators responsible for?
Sure. And right now, the Attorney General's office has an environmental crimes unit, which is way too small. There are 4 attorneys in the environmental crimes unit, and it really just focuses on intentional crimes like intentional storage of hazardous material or illegal dumping or discharge. What I've called for is an independent environmental inspection and enforcement unit in the Attorney General's office that can inspect and ensure or enforce compliance for federal and state laws, clean air, clean water, even if it doesn't rise to a criminal violation. I'm very excited about what the General Assembly did this session in passing the Climate Solutions Now Act. Yes, they focus on climate change issues like reducing carbon emissions from buildings. I think the next iteration, and where I will advocate as the Attorney General, is focusing on electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, privately owned vehicles, account for 40% of the carbon footprint in the transportation sector. So I think we really need to go a long way. That's why I was able to get an earmark for Anne Arundel County, because I represent Anne Arundel County now in Congress, to accelerate their pivot to electric buses. But the part about the Climate Solutions Now Act that I think is the most exciting are the environmental justice provisions. But we need to go further. We need to adopt a law that was adopted just recently in New Jersey, where if a industrial activity that is either discharging emissions or communities underrepresented, overburdened, or run.
Okay, we are going to, again, to continue the conversation, we will just go ahead and move on to our next question, and we'll give an opportunity for Mr. Brown to potentially come join us in just a few more minutes. So our final question is really related to policing. Police often use the odor of marijuana as an excuse to stop and search Black people and other people of color, often without probable cause. Now that we're moving toward legalization and the ballot measure is likely to pass, what will you do to stop Black and brown people from having their Fourth Amendment rights violated in relationship to marijuana?
Thanks, Tania. So about a few years ago, the Court of Appeals actually ruled, and now it is law here in the state of Maryland, that the police cannot use the odor of marijuana as a pretextual stop or search. So simply the odor of marijuana, which we all know is very pungent, cannot be a basis for you to be questioned or stopped by the police officer, cannot be the basis for a search of your vehicle or your person. So that is now the law in Maryland, and that is how it's been for about 2 to 3 years. Now, with the legalization of marijuana, where I testified on favor of that, I think we're going to see a lot of lives saved, because I know, I mean, the only candidate in this race in the primary that's actually tried criminal cases. So, and I know how disproportionately the Black and brown community has been targeted when it comes to marijuana laws. That's why we started a diversion court in Baltimore City, where I sat in drug treatment court for many years, where, people who came to court with issues involving, not selling drugs, but, using drugs or having small quantities of drugs, we got into drug treatment programs, and we treated them as clients, not as defendants. We treated them as clients coming into the court, getting into inpatient and outpatient services, because sometimes it wasn't marijuana. Oftentimes it was more serious drugs like heroin and fentanyl and cocaine. So, making sure that people got the help they needed when they came to court. That was the big bulk of the work that I did, not only with the domestic violence cases and trying to cut down on violence in families, but when it came to drug treatment court and helping make sure that citizens who were suffering from mental health issues, drug addiction issues, sometimes both, got the services that they needed so they could get back to their lives, get back to their jobs and their families. And then we did a whole bunch of work on expungements, making sure that all of these charges were taken off records so that people would have no barriers when it came to employment or schools. So I think that's important. We really need to make sure that the police, in so many levels, are held accountable for violations of rights, and that's something that I know about because I've worked in the criminal justice system, and I've seen great officers, but sadly, I've seen officers who have terrorized communities, and we need to make sure that we have accountability and transparency all across the board.
Thank you so much. I want to just check in with our team to see if Mr. Brown is still with us to answer the last question before we move to closing remarks. So hearing nothing, Ms. O'Malley, you get to close us out. You get to close us out with any parting thoughts or things that you didn't get a chance to touch on that you'd like to at this moment.
Thanks, Tanea. Reed Temple Church and the James Parker Lay Organization, Social Action Committee, I really applaud you for putting the forum on. It's great to talk with everyone about these important issues and how important the Attorney General is to Marylanders all across the board. Right now, there's so much at stake here in Maryland. We're seeing a horrific rise in violent crime. We just had a 17-year-old boy shot and murdered at the Inner Harbor, not too far from where I am sitting, and his parents buried him in his prom outfit that he had purchased for himself. I really am affected by that. I'm affected by what happened in Texas with the AR-15s. We've seen automatic weapons used in many cases here in Maryland, even though they're illegal, and they were made illegal here in our state 10 years ago. So we really need an Attorney General that's going to keep communities safe, keep policing safe and accountable. And we need an Attorney General who's going to protect our environment. And also our fundamental rights right now are under attack, especially as a woman. This is personal to me. What Roe v. Wade has meant for women and girls all across our state and our country for the past 50 years has been such a step forward. And now with our Supreme Court taking those rights away is going to put so many lives in danger of women and young girls. So I want to fight to make sure Maryland is a sanctuary state where we keep our right to choose here, make it a part of our constitutional amendment, and make sure that we're not allowing other states to extradite people who come to Maryland for reproductive services here. And that's something that I'm very passionate about because my mother and my grandmother grew up in a time when women didn't have this right. And I know it's a personal decision, it's a private issue that shouldn't be regulated by the state. But they're not just coming for women's reproductive rights. They're also going to come after our other privacy rights, like right to marry whom you love. That's why we passed marriage equality here in Maryland back in 2012. They're probably going to try to overturn that. They're probably going to try to overturn, interracial marriages. It's not going to stop just with women's reproductive rights. That's why I urge you all to vote. I know you're telling everybody how to vote, and that's so great. Urge everybody to vote on July the 19th. I hope you vote for me. I will promise to be a strong advocate for everyone here across the state. And you can go to my website, katieformd.com, to get more information about all of my policies that I've actually published on the website. So thanks, and I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend.
And thank you so very much. I want to offer a sincere debt of gratitude to you for the work that you've done already in the state and for your commitment to doing more. And the same for Mr. Brown, whose connection dropped, unfortunately, during his commuting. But it is such an honor to have had the opportunity to be in conversation with you both. And we look forward to hearing more and learning more about your platforms and the work that you expect to do as in the roles that you aspire for. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
For his mighty acts, for his excellent greatness, for waking you up this morning, for starting you on your way, for clothing you in your right mind, for food on your table, for clothes on your back, for the activities of your limbs. The fact that you opened your eyes this morning is more than enough reason to give him glory. Every crawling thing, every flying thing, everything that has breath, every person, even the wind and the waves obey him. Even the trees praise the Lord every time they swing in the wind. Everything means every living thing on earth ought to praise the Lord. It's not a greeting, y'all. It's a command that you ought to praise the Lord our God. Because if we had 10,000 tongues, that would not be enough to give God praise. We owe him a praise this morning. Some of us are overdue. We are you were commanded. Come on and do as you were commanded. It's not a greeting, it wasn't optional. Do as you were commanded. Give God glory. Give God praise. Because if it had not been for the Lord who was on our side.
So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our candidates forum. I want to thank the three candidates for Attorney General who participated in the first part of our forum, and want to welcome all of the candidates who are in the discussion today for the office of governor. And thank you all for participating, for all of you who are either streaming with us and engaging and listening to the conversation. I just want to thank you for taking the time to engage in civic leadership and your participation in democracy in this way. So for the next conversation we'll have will be for candidates who are seeking the role of governor of the state of Maryland. The governor is the chief executive officer of the state and commander-in-chief of its military forces. The executive branch of Maryland government includes executive departments, independent agencies, numerous commissions, task forces, committees, and advisory boards. To each annual session of the General Assembly, the governor must submit a budget of government for the following year. The governor must also inform the General Assembly of any time of the conditions of the state. Most commonly, this occurs through the governor's State of the State address at the beginning of the regular legislative session in January or February. Every bill passed by the General Assembly, except the annual budget bill, must be presented to the governor before it becomes law. The governor then may sign the bill into law or veto it. Any bill that the governor vetoes may be passed without his signature by a 3/5 vote of the total number of members of each house of the General Assembly, either at the current session or at the session following. If a bill is presented more than 6 days before the General Assembly adjourns and is not vetoed within 6 days, or if a bill is presented within 6 days prior to the adjournment of the General Assembly and is not vetoed within 30 days after its presentment, then the bill becomes law without the governor's signature. The governor may veto any part of an appropriate bill in the same manner as other bills without vetoing it in its entirety. And it is so important for us to fully know and understand and appreciate the role of the governor and all of the other elected offices in our system of government. I want to start by noting that all candidates were invited to participate in this forum today. No Republican candidates for governor accepted our invitation, so we will not be presenting any Republican candidates for governor at today's forum. I want to start by introducing that we have 4 Democratic candidates for governor. One has submitted a recorded message, is unable to participate live due to his religious observation of the Sabbath. So we will start with the recorded message from Ralph W. Jaffe.
My name is Ralph Jaffe. I'm a Democratic candidate for governor of the state of Maryland. I want to thank your church organization for allowing me to talk. First of all, I started a movement back in 1992 to get rid of all the corruption in Maryland politics and to replace it with real, true, ethical reform. We've made a lot of progress. I'm a teacher, I'm not a politician. And I believe the best way to teach is by action, not words. So I use a campaign, this is my 8th campaign, to show my students where the corruption is. And then if they want, they can vote for what I stand for. I'm trying to create a new standard of behavior for future politicians on how they have to behave. The way to do that is by my principles. One of my principles is I don't take campaign contributions because they are disguised bribes. I don't do that. And by the way, I am a sincere candidate. This is not an exercise in academia. I am going to win with your help. And I'm, by the way, challenging the other candidates. I respect them all. I do not have to respect their behavior. And I'm challenging all the other candidates. My budget by design is $499. Yes, $499. I challenge all the other candidates to do as I'm doing. Limit your campaign now from now on to $499. Take the rest of the money and give it to the poor and needy of our state. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to give my salary to the poor and needy of our state. And by the way, I'm not a millionaire. I can prove that to you. I haven't paid taxes in 25 years. You know why? Because everything I've been doing has been for free. First of all, I help people find jobs. Don't charge for that. I counsel people. Don't charge for that. I work on community projects. We have a project right now. We're trying to get a traffic light in a private religious school. And we've had over 4,000 people, made at least 4,000 phone calls. Some have done 2 or 3. We still don't have the light. But we got to keep trying. And I'm the only politician who's only going to serve 1 term. Because this way I'm saying to the people, I'm not in this for the money, power, the fame. I just want to be a good public servant. When my term is up, I will never again run. You see, these career politicians, they're ruining our country. I will serve 1 term. When my 1 term is up, I'm done. And that's it. I'm the only politician who's committed to telling the truth all the time, not just some of the time. So we made a lot of progress. I'm very proud of the fact that per dollar in all my campaigns, I've gotten more votes than anybody. So when I went on the ballot in 210, I thought I was ready. So from 210 to 218 is 8 years. In this 8-year period, on a budget by design of around $1,700 spread over 8 years, I'm very proud of the fact that we've gotten over, ready for this, over 42,000 votes on a budget of $1,700 spread over 8 years. Now, the money came from my sister and myself. We kept the word. We do not take campaign contributions because they're bribes. So these are some of the things that I want to do. I want to bring about, like I said, real, true, ethical reform. And I can't do it without your help. I don't want your money. I just want your support. So if you want to help me and be part of this movement, I urge you to check my website, fedupwithcrookedpolitics.com, and also check my Facebook. So it's FEDUPWITH, crooked with a D, politics.com, fedupwithcrookedpolitics.com. I'm also on Facebook. I've got a tutor mentor program that is designed to keep kids in school instead of dropping out like flies. We've already got a program set up in Prince George's County, and this program won't cost the taxpayers 1 penny. So this is what I'm all about. And like I said, I'm the only one running who is committed to real ethical reform. I've got a track record. I've kept my word. This is what I'm all about. I urge you to join the movement, and we can have a tremendous victory this coming July. I thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jaffe. I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute, but we want to invite the additional candidates. We have 3 who are joining us today who to give opening statements. Each candidate is invited to give 2 minutes in opening statements, and we're going to start with Mr. Rushern Baker. So welcome to the stage, Mr. Rushern Baker.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
We can hear you. We cannot see you, Mr. Baker.
Okay. Let me see. I'm having problems with this.
If your stop cam is on, then you should just hit that button so that it opens your camera.
I have it open. Can you come back to me while we try? I apologize. We're driving. So can you come back to me? I'm going to try and fix this. Sorry.
Okay, let's do that. If that's fine by us. So let's go ahead and move to our second candidate, Mr. John Barron. We want to invite you to the stage to give your opening remarks, and welcome to the forum.
Thank you. You can see me and hear me?
We can, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate this. I'm John Barron. I'm a former nonprofit executive and Clinton administration official. I have been an appointee of Democratic and Republican presidents, and I've gotten major federal legislation enacted into law that's benefited Maryland and other states. My running mate is the wonderful Natalie Williams of Prince George's County. The reason that Natalie and I are running is that Maryland is not making progress on major problems that damage millions of lives, and we are offering a fundamentally different approach. In education, more than a quarter of middle school students in our state can't read at a basic level. Those and other achievement numbers, they're no different than they were 20 years ago. Moderate income Marylanders have seen stagnant wages since the 1980s, as income inequality has soared, and our state has made no progress reducing our poverty rate in more than 30 years. Fellow Marylanders, we can't just keep doing the same thing we've been doing for decades, rolling out one unproven government program after another and expect a different result, because unfortunately, many programs, no matter how well-meaning they are, just don't work. Instead, to make progress, we need to expand solutions that don't just sound like they're good ideas, but have actually been tested in the real world and shown to make a big difference in people's lives. I'll give you one concrete example. When I'm governor, we will expand high-quality tutoring to every struggling first and second grader in the entire state of Maryland, because that has been shown to move them up toward grade level early before their problems get serious in later grades. And we're going to do this by recruiting an army of people from the community, including retirees and recent college graduates, to become tutors for a modest stipend as a public service. That's just one example of a proven solution I'll bring. But the key theme is, if we simply continue on our current course, we're going to be here in another 20 years and nothing will have changed. To make progress, we have to zero in on solutions that are tested and shown effective. That's why I'm running for governor. Let's do what works.
Thank you, Mr. Barron, and we look forward to hearing more about your plans for solutions in the conversation ahead. Next up, I'd like to invite Ashwani Jain to the conversation for opening remarks. And please correct me with your name. I apologize if I didn't say it properly.
No, thank you. So you got it right. Thank you so much for having me and also for inviting every candidate to this forum. I appreciate that. So my name is Ashwani Jain. I use he, him pronouns. I am running for governor to make politics inclusive and accessible. Now, unfortunately, as someone who would be the nation's youngest governor, I am told I do not have what it takes. They say to be governor, you have to be over 40 or have elected experience. But somehow, as a 32-year-old, I've been able to work in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, the Obama White House, and 2 federal agencies. They say to be governor, residents should not be making all your policy and strategy. But somehow, we created the first statewide campaign in America that is 100% run by residents. They say to be governor, you have to spend 90% of your time talking to donors and those with connections. But somehow, I'm the only governor candidate to spend 90% of my time meeting voters at their homes in a different county every day of the week. And they say to be governor, you have to raise a lot of money. But somehow, we have built one of the largest grassroots campaigns without hosting a single fundraiser and without taking a penny from developers, businesses, PACs, or polluters. But does it matter? Does it matter how people run their campaigns? I think it does. So I may not have what it takes to just be any governor, but I will be a new kind of governor for each of you. One who is the most accessible, most accountable, and most transparent. Because I'm not just trying to win this election. I'm trying to change our politics for generations to come. So I look forward to the questions today, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jane. I'd like to see if we can bring back Mr. Rashawn Baker to the forum to give opening remarks.
Okay, I think there I am. Can you hear
Absolutely.
me?
We can hear you and see you.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this forum, and I apologize. We're on the road, but I wanted to be a part of this very important conversation. First of all, I love the fact that before the forum started, we talked about the powers of the governor and what exactly the governor does. It is one of the things I've emphasized in this election. The governor is the chief executive of the state. Only one of us and my colleagues who are running are great individuals, but only one of us has actually been a chief executive of a municipality or a county in Maryland, and that is me. I served 8 years as Prince George's County executive. I served 8 years as in the Maryland State Legislature, where I served on appropriation, which deals with the budget. And then I served on judiciary, which deals with many of the problems that we face today. And then went on to be county executive in 2010 to 2018. The reason I bring that up is we're at a critical point, actually an inflection point in our state and in our nation. Two things that have shown us this is COVID-19 and George Floyd. And for me, those were pivotal moments. Watching our nation come to grips with its original sin, which is slavery, and watching the fact that COVID exposed to us the disparities between many of us in this state. And so for me, as a chief executive, having done these hard works in both Prince George's County and at the state level, we need somebody who can, on day one, govern this state. Someone who's actually created jobs in the state of Maryland. Somebody who's actually dealt with crime and headed up a police force in Maryland. Someone who's actually had to deal with the issues of our public school system and the disparity in our health care system. And so we need a governor that actually can speak truth to power. And that's what I'm doing in this campaign, to speak real truths about what's going on, but has the experience to lead us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. All right, let's get to the questions. The Maryland General Assembly recently overrode the governor's veto to support sweeping reproductive justice and reproductive rights legislations. What do you think of this legislation, and do you have any additional policies or programs in your platform to address access to reproductive health services? Let's start with Mr. Barron, if that's all right. We'll go with Mr. Barron, Mr. Jane, and then Mr. Baker.
So the threat to reproductive rights is very real. The decision about whether to become a parent, when to become a parent, that is just about the most consequential decision that a person can make in their life. And the idea that the government, from the moment of conception, can make that decision rather than the individual woman is absolutely appalling to me. It's the opposite of conservative. It is the government's intrusion into the most personal decisions as someone can make. So I'm glad. I hope the Supreme Court decision does not go forward to overturn Roe v. Wade, but here's what we can do in Maryland. Number one, I strongly support the legislation that recently passed, and I would release funding immediately to provide for training of physician assistants and nurse practitioners and others to be able to carry out abortions. They can do so safely, as the American Academy of Obstetrics and Gynecology have found. So we should do that. The second piece is I support a state referendum to include the protections of Roe v. Wade in the state constitution, to enshrine it there. Those are two concrete actions we can take, as well as working at a national level.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Jane.
There we go. Thank you so much for that question. So I'm proud to say that I was the first candidate in the entire state of Maryland to actually release a comprehensive reproductive justice platform on my website a year and a half ago in January of 2021. And you can go to janeforgovernor.com to hold me accountable. But within that, I talk about looking at the issue comprehensively, making sure we are enshrining healthcare like abortion care, contraceptive coverage, and gender affirmation treatment within our state constitution, making sure that we teach comprehensive sex ed in all of our public health classes that teach everything from abstinence to contraceptives to gender identity to domestic violence, making sure we have free menstrual products in every public restroom, making sure we're expanding the availability of medication abortion, especially in pharmacies, which is really the main primary place that folks in rural communities go to for healthcare needs, making sure we remove parental consent requirements in order for folks to get an abortion, and expanding lactation accommodations for mothers who re-enter the workforce. That is how we protect women, non-binary individuals, making sure that we actually have full access to healthcare. And if governor, I would make sure that we are not only an abortion sanctuary for our residents, but we are expanding access to healthcare for any resident from other states who would need those accommodations as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jain. I want to invite Mr. Baker to answer the same question.
Well, thank you. I agree with my colleagues. Certainly, as governor, I would sign the legislation. I want to applaud the General Assembly for doing that. And the other step that I would take is to actually put a woman's right to choose in the Constitution so that, and this is something I've supported since the beginning of my career when I was in the legislature in 1995. But we have to really, if we want to be honest about this discussion, a woman's right to choose is really about color and poverty, because the people who are going to be most affected by this, everyone else will have a choice. They can go to another state or they can go to their own clinic, but it's really people who are poor and who are of color that are most affected. And so I think we have to do more in this state than just simply protect our own. We need to be the voice that's talking about this on a nationwide issue. And so as governor, I would use my platform to talk about reproductive right and the right of women to choose to do with their body what they choose. And so I would be not just a state advocate, but a national advocate on a woman's right to choose. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much for those responses. We're going to transition a little bit now to the issue of housing. We know that housing continues to be an obstacle for many, whether buying or renting. I'd love for you all to speak to how you plan to address the issue of affordable housing, both ownership and rental. And why don't we start in the reverse order with Mr. Baker. Mr. Jain, you remain in the middle, and then Mr. Barron.
Okay. Well, thank you for that question. It's something that I've been working on, not just as an elected official, but I started my career working for the DC Department of Housing and Community Development around this very issue of affordable housing and access to workforce housing. And then as county executive, it faced me, front and center. And so what we did at the county level, and I think we can do this at the state level, is we actually work with the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, combine their resources with the county's resources to make sure anytime we were doing development, especially around our metro centers, that we actually set aside workforce housing for individuals. If you look at the Purple Line, when I negotiated us expanding the Purple Line and starting the Purple Line in Prince George's County, part of that negotiation was that we would set aside affordable housing and access to housing. The other things that we can do right now, and we've done this, and I think we can do a combination, is start buying up some of the apartments as a county and then team up with the state. And I want to do this as governor, team up with the state to redevelop some of these formerly, private apartments and set them aside for our seniors, like we did with Glen Arden, the First Baptist Church of Glen Arden in there, and then working with our nonprofits and our faith communities to make sure we're providing adequate housing for our folks. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jain, same question.
Absolutely. So thank you again for that question. So I served as one of President Obama's White House liaisons at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So that's the experience that I bring when I talk about my housing plan, which again can be found in full transparency at janeforgovernor.com, which has 3 parts: increasing affordability of housing, availability of housing, and sustainability of housing. When I talk about affordability of housing, I talk about providing immediate relief so that no one is being evicted, especially during times of crisis, expanding our MPDU zoning programs so we actually have affordable housing regardless of what zip code you live in, and also dedicated funding for nonprofits that are helping house those who are chronically homeless and get them jobs and other mental health services. When I talk about availability of housing, I talk about smart growth and mixed use development, actually not just focused on single family housing, but multifamily housing as well. Prohibiting discrimination from landlords, whether you are trans, whether you are a veteran, whether you are formerly incarcerated, you should still have full access and availability of housing. And then finally, when I talk about sustainability, I talk about improving homeowner forbearance notifications. So in case you miss a payment, you're not being foreclosed on, increasing the eviction filing fees, making sure we have just cause protections in place, and then supporting my Maryland Now plan, which can do a couple different things, but it's going to eliminate the state income tax for 95% of Marylanders without raising property taxes or cutting services, making public transit free, and creating the nation's first guaranteed jobs program for anyone who's struggling to find work.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jain. Mr. Barron?
Thank you. Affordable, safe housing is a basic human right, and it is a foundation for so much else like stable families and healthy child development. So it would be a top priority of my administration. One of my main, I have a number of proposals in this area, but one of my main ones is this. Everybody supports affordable housing, building more affordable housing, as long as it's done in the next county. There's clearly a statewide role for expanding affordable housing. One thing that we could do is common sense zoning reform, similar to what California and Washington have recently done, which says that even in areas that are zoned for single family housing, a homeowner is allowed to build one accessory unit, like a granny flat or a duplex. We're not changing the neighborhood in a major way, no high rises, nothing like that. But this modest or common sense change to allow one additional unit, there's studies showing if this were done on a large basis, it would greatly increase the supply of affordable housing and reduce the cost. My proposal is to try that as a sizable demonstration project here in Maryland with counties that are willing to go forward in the initial demonstration. See how well it works in expanding the supply of affordable housing. If it does, expand it statewide.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baring. So now we're going to transition to the topic of education. Funding for education has historically been discriminatory, especially for Prince George's County. The current funds are helpful, but how will you ensure that places like Prince George's County and potentially Baltimore receive proper school funding? Let's start this question with Mr. Jain, Mr. Barron, and then we'll wrap up with Mr. Baker.
Thank you so much. So for context and perspective, my running mate, Latrice Hawkins Lights, is a product of Prince George's County Public Schools. I'm a product of Montgomery County Public Schools. And so public education means everything to me and my team. My grandfather was actually a high school custodian when he immigrated to this country from India to provide for his family of 7 and achieve his American dream. I attended a Title I elementary school in Wheaton, which had mold on the ceilings, overcrowded with students, and great educators who just didn't have the resources they needed. And then when I was battling cancer in middle school, it was the entire ecosystem of the school that allowed me to feel supported. So that's the context about when I talk about having universal pre-K, easing student debt for educators, reducing the barriers to becoming an educator in the first place, and diversifying the educator pool, making sure we're prioritizing funding for low-income neighborhoods when it comes to school construction, making sure we're addressing affordable housing so educators can actually live where they teach, making sure we move away from standardized testing to more performance-based testing, mandating and requiring financial literacy credits to graduate high school, making sure that we actually remove and replace SROs from all of our public schools and instead invest in more mental health professionals so we're getting to the root causes of a lot of these issues that young people are facing. And then beyond that, making sure that higher education is more accessible and more affordable, whether that's community college, whether that's a 4-year institution or trade schools, making sure that we're expanding scholarship programs, work study programs, student loan forgiveness, and ensuring also that undocumented students can qualify for these programs. So it's looking at the entire system comprehensively from pre-K all the way after high school as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Barron?
Thank you. So education is one of the reasons I got into this race. As I mentioned at the top, more than a quarter of middle school students in Maryland can't read at a basic level. More than a third can't do basic math. Those numbers are no different than 20 years ago. And the black-white achievement gap in Maryland is substantially higher than the national average. All of this is true even though Maryland saw a major rise in education spending during the 2000s, about a 40% increase in education spending per pupil after adjusting for inflation. I support the blueprint, and I support expanded education funding. It does need to be done equitably, as you described, but this time also it needs to be focused on solutions, education programs that don't just sound like good ideas, but have been shown to make a big difference in people's lives. I gave the example of statewide tutoring in the early grades that could make an enormous difference. It's been shown to move kids up to grade level early before the problems become serious. Other examples of proven solutions include career academies in high poverty high schools, which are small learning communities with a career theme and links to local employers. They've been shown to increase workforce earnings by $3,000 per year 11 years later. That's a real improvement in somebody's life, and that's been shown to occur. The last example of a proven solution I give, I would expand KIPP public charter schools. These are no excuses public charter schools. They've been shown to increase reading and math achievement school-wide by about 10 percentile points. That's where I would focus the funding.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Baker.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, one of the things that, our ticket understands very well is we've actually worked on these issues. Nancy Navarro started out as on the school board in Montgomery County. Her children went to public schools there. As a legislator and as county executive, I worked on these issues. And all of my children went to public schools. And a lot of the things that my colleagues are saying are very good ideas. And the question is, we as a state have never really been committed to actually fixing our public school system. We've thrown money at it, but not in a consistent and permanent way. So one of the examples that Mr. Barron gave, which he's absolutely right, some of our job readiness programs that we're doing at the high school, we did it for a targeted number of high schools in Prince George's County, and they do work, but there's not the dedicated funding for that to do it everywhere. Same thing with pre-K education and tutoring programs. There's a lot of good things that we talk about, and we talked about this 20 years ago in the Thornton Commission, but we never really put the political will and leadership to get it done. And now with the current commission coming along, the governor actually vetoed the bill 2 years in a row. So the current commission is actually 2 years old. And now that we've gone through COVID, it's probably 10 years behind. What we have to do is have a governor that's committed with the experience of actually working with the state, working with the local jurisdictions to actually fund these programs and make sure that they're working and put the type of resources behind them. We have not fully committed ourselves to doing that as a state, and now is the time to do it. And that's what I would do as governor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Baker. So we're going to transition a bit to the topic of health and public health. It is interesting. We get to note that COVID-19 remains a public health crisis, and it's one that continues to disproportionately impact people of color. I would love to hear you all speak to kind of what the additional reforms that you would implement to protect us all and to continue to prevent the spread of the virus and the ongoing impact or implications of those who have been affected. So let's start. Let's go back to our original order. Mr. Barron, Mr. Jane, and then Mr. Baker.
So thank you. I'm going to talk to public health generally first in terms of vaccines and then other areas. My general approach here as in other areas is to expand solutions that, again, have been tested and shown to work, aren't just nice sounding ideas. In the area of COVID, the thing that we know prevents, it's been tested and proven to reduce the rate of serious COVID illness and death is the vaccine. It reduces it by about 90%. So I was the first candidate to call for vaccine requirements for all educators, healthcare workers, and students age 16 plus. That's the most effective strategy out there. Currently, only about 75% of eligible Marylanders have been vaccinated and boosted. We need to get those numbers up to 90% to make sure we're not vulnerable to additional waves of COVID, serious COVID illness and death. More generally, in public health, I would expand innovations in healthcare delivery that have been proven to improve health and reduce cost. As one example, there's a program in Los Angeles that pairs Black barbershops with pharmacists. So when patrons, the men, come in to get their hair cut, they get screened for high blood pressure. And if needed, they get medication. It was shown to reduce the rate of uncontrolled hypertension, which is a leading killer of Black men, by more than half. It's a common sense solution, meets people where they are. We should be doing this statewide in Maryland. It would make an enormous difference in public health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barron. Mr. Jain, could you talk about public health and specifically COVID-19?
Yeah. So, since January of 2021, we had a specific COVID and beyond policy memo shared a year and a half ago on our website, janeforgovernor.com. And in that, there's a couple things that we can do practically, right? We have to do more, especially at the beginning of the pandemic and, just in the future, in case these kind of things happen again, for vaccine equity. That means hiring and investing in more mobile education units to go specifically into communities of color and low-income neighborhoods to educate the members of the community about the importance of getting treated, of getting tested, of where you can actually go get resources. We have to make sure that we actually have universal broadband so that if we do move to a virtual setting, whether it's for school or business, that if you live in the Eastern Shore, you live in Western Maryland, or you live anywhere in Maryland that doesn't have access to broadband, that you're not being discriminated against or being left out of certain opportunities. We also have to make sure that we're supporting and increasing the budget for hazard pay. There's so many members of our community that still had to work in person during this crisis, and they did not get hazard pay, which they deserve. It's not only the right thing to do, it's not only the right way to thank these individuals, but it also can help our economy and the sustainability of our communities. We do and need to have vaccine mandates, and we need to make sure that we are requiring folks to wear masks if a majority of our residents are not fully vaccinated, and you're indoors and you're, doing all the other things according to the CDC. And then, I would also make sure that we have an actual playbook and doing an audit of all the hospitals and community health centers to figure out what did they need at the beginning of this pandemic that they did not have. What are some of the best practices so that, God forbid, something like this happens again, we're not starting from scratch.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Jain. Mr. Baker, public health, COVID-19 specifically.
Well, first of all, you have to understand, and the governor and I understand, is that the governor is the leader of our dealing with this crisis across our state. That means the governor and the county executive and the mayor of Baltimore, they jointly appoint the health officers. But at the beginning of this COVID-19 outbreak, I think the governor should have called together his Homeland Security person and said, this is a statewide crisis. We need to deal with it under one policy, so we don't have 24 jurisdictions making decisions. The other is, when there was a time when you had Prince George's County and Montgomery County that had high numbers of needs for COVID station and testing, we found the governor actually not spending the resources in those areas because they weren't places that voted for him. So that's the first thing. The governor has to take a lead across the state on healthcare issues. The second thing is, what COVID exposed to us is how unequal our healthcare system is. I know it firsthand as county executive, because when I came in, we had one of the highest number of uninsured and underinsured, mostly Black and brown folks who didn't have health insurance and didn't have access to a primary care physician, which meant that when COVID hit us, they were the ones with the underlying conditions, the ones that we were seeing dying before a vaccine was put there. COVID just exposed, the unequal, the disparity in healthcare throughout our state. So one of the first things as governor is dealing with COVID, which is ongoing, but making sure that every Marylander has access to quality health care, that we really are providing basic primary care, so we don't see the underlying conditions that we found ourselves facing with COVID.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're down to our final question, and I'm just appreciating the thoughtfulness that the team took in preparing these questions. But the question is, Maryland's tax system is especially discriminatory towards people of color, especially Black women, while the state also boasts many millionaires who pay less than their fair share. Do you have any plans or policies to address the issue of taxation and Maryland's tax system? Let's start with Mr. Baker. Why don't we start there? Jane in the middle, and then Mr. Barron.
Yes. So, for me, like I said, having experience dealing with this as an executive, we know that we're losing many of our folks who are moving out of, Prince George's County in the state of Maryland because of our tax system, especially our property taxes. And we should move toward reducing property taxes around the state. We should also move toward reducing those regressive taxes that we see on our sales tax and things of that nature. And how do we do that? Well, the way you do it is actually expand your commercial tax base. One of the things that we did well in the county when I was executive was to grow our business tax base, which allowed us to then reduce some of the other burdensome taxes that we see. And then, but the other part of that is you're absolutely right. We see businesses and individuals that don't pay their fair share. We've got to get that money back from them. One of the ways to do it is there's a bill that Senator Paul Pinsky puts in called combined reporting, which means these corporations that are going elsewhere and not paying their fair share should pay it here. The other thing is we shouldn't let millionaires and billionaires get away with this. When we try to increase the taxes on those who are making more than $1 million, we saw this big outcry from their lobbying groups, which is one of the reasons I don't take corporate money or PAC money, because that's how those bills were defeated. We've got to make sure everybody pays their fair share, especially those who have, the means to do it. And so that is the only way we're going to reduce the burden on those middle class folks that we see it going up on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next candidate, please.
Solutions to that. One is making sure people pay their fair share, and then the second is my Maryland Now plan. So when it comes to making sure that folks pay their fair share, that means requiring combined reporting. That means also ensuring that out-of-state corporations doing business in Maryland are actually paying taxes on goods that are shipped into our state. And it means taxing companies who make more than $100 million a year from their digital advertisements to actually pay their fair share in taxes. Now, the other part of this, which I mentioned earlier in one of my remarks, is the Maryland Now plan. The Maryland Now plan is fully funded. You can find it at janeforgovernor.com. It's going to eliminate the state income tax for 95% of Marylanders. If you make less than $400,000 in the state of Maryland, we're going to eliminate your state income tax, allowing you to have more disposable income, an average of $2,000 per year per individual. We're not going to cut services. We're not going to raise property taxes. And we're going to allow more folks to actually be able to spend or save. That also means we have to have a guaranteed jobs program to make sure that if you're suffering from the labor market, if you're being discriminated against in the labor market, you have access to good paying jobs. And we reduce your cost of living overall so that you're able to stay in the state, retire in the state, or move into the state. That means making public transit completely free, making sure we have affordable housing, making sure we're reducing medical debt, making sure we have good infrastructure projects in place and good public schools. It's tackling the entire system comprehensively. And the final piece of this is making sure we have accountability. How many times have we seen politicians or candidates say that we're going to promise this budget for X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't actually get allocated in that way? We have to bring accountability into the process.
Thank you, Mr. Jane. So, Mr. Barron, why don't you wrap us up on the question of taxes in the state of Maryland?
Yeah, so I do not, in my campaign, I am not taking any money from corporations or political action committees or Maryland lobbyists, because Maryland deserves a governor that answers to the voters and not to special interests. So that would allow me to be in a position to close corporate loopholes and take other steps that the special interests are proposing. I did support the tax relief focused on low and moderate income seniors that the General Assembly passed and the governor signed into law recently. But there are other steps we can take. In addition to the loopholes and that kind of tax relief, there's one other important step that I would take at the bottom end, at the lower end, for lower income folks. I would test bold new ideas for addressing poverty, like an anti-poverty program for the long-term unemployed that helps them to find a full-time job through job search and other assistance. And if they do, offers them a sizable earning supplement. The idea is, if you work hard in Maryland full-time, we're going to help you move out of poverty. Versions of this approach have been tested in Milwaukee and in Canada, and were found to reduce the poverty rate among participants by about 10 percentage points. That's a really large improvement in people's lives. We should try it here in Maryland, initially as a demonstration. If it works here, expand it statewide.
Thank you very, very much. So we are near the end of our political candidates forum for the office of governor, and I'm going to invite each of you to just offer your sort of 2-minute closing remarks or your summary statements. We'll start with Mr. Jane, and then Mr. Barron, and then Mr. Baker. You will close us out. So in that order, please. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you sincerely for this opportunity, and thank you for inviting all the candidates. It does mean a lot. Once again, to everyone who's listening, my name is Ashwani Jain, and I am running for governor to make politics inclusive and accessible. So here are 4 main reasons to vote for me. Number 1, even though I would be the nation's youngest governor, I have the experience and perspective needed, having already worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, the Obama administration, the Obama White House, and 2 federal agencies. Number 2, I am fully accessible, being one of the only candidates that guarantees 100% of my events are free and actually spending all my time meeting voters at their homes in a different county every day of the week. Number 3, I'm fully accountable. We are the only statewide campaign in the United States that is 100% crowdsourced, 100% run by residents from every age, every background, and each of our 24 counties. And finally, I'm fully transparent. We have shared the most detailed, comprehensive, and fully paid for policy agenda at janeforgovernor.com since last January 2021. So if anyone has any questions about what was discussed today, what was not discussed, if you want to have a one-on-one, if you want to learn more, please go to janeforgovernor.com, and I'm happy to make the time to schedule a conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Jain. Thank you for your candidacy. Mr. Barron.
Thank you. So all the candidates in this race for governor, we share similar goals. We all want to improve public education. We all want to increase wages. We all want to address, improve social and racial equality. But the other candidate's approach to achieving those goals misses a fundamental point, which is that many government programs, no matter how well-meaning they are, just don't work, as we've seen too often when the results are measured. So when the other candidates propose to roll out or expand one unproven government program after another, as we've heard this afternoon in housing and education, and as we've heard again and again over the course of the campaign under slogans like "Get Stuff Done" or "No Person Left Behind," it's just not going to bring progress. That's what we've been doing for decades. I mean, 20 years from now, will our children look back at this time and say, we faced all of these persistent problems: stagnant student achievement, stagnant wages, stagnant poverty rates, and we just kept doing the same thing again and again? Or will they look back and say that at this moment in this election, Maryland did something extraordinary, that we led the nation, we pioneered a new governing approach based on ideas that don't just sound good, aren't just spending money, aren't just well-meaning, but have actually been tested in the real world and shown to make a major difference in people's lives, like some of the examples I've described tonight, including tutoring in the early grades for struggling students, career academies in high-poverty high schools, the partnership between Black barbershops and pharmacists and others. And that, will they say that we finally, through this approach, move the needle on stagnant wages and education and poverty and racial equity and other problems? That's the future I want for Maryland. I'm asking for your help to get us there. My website is johnbarron.com, JONBARON.com. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Thank you for your candidacy. And Mr. Baker, please wrap us up.
Thank you. I want to thank Reed Temple AME Church and the James Parker Lay Foundation organization for this. This is a very important one. I also want to say, for more information, please go to our website. It's Baker Navarro for Maryland. We're at an inflection point in our state's history and in our nation's history. And this is the time I agree with my colleagues, it's not just about what you believe or what you say, it's really about what you can get done. Because if you're not willing, if you can't actually achieve any of these things, then you're just talking. It is also a time for us to speak truth to power. We haven't talked about the fact that over the last 8 years, you had 2,000 young Black men die in Baltimore City and people act like it's normal. We haven't talked about the fact that in Prince George's County, for the first time in almost 15 to 20 years, we had 130 homicides and carjackings are going up. We haven't talked about the fact that in one of the richest states in the richest country in the world, that during COVID, we found people in Baltimore City and in Prince George's County, Montgomery County, who didn't have health insurance and so weren't going to the doctors. All of these things have to be changed, but they can't be changed if you don't know how to actually operate a governorship in Maryland. If you haven't actually worked on these problems of crime, education, healthcare in this state, that is fundamentally different between our campaign and the rest. Councilwoman Nancy Navarro, who started off on the school board and is now the only woman on the council in Montgomery County, and I have worked on these issues. We know what works and what doesn't work. That is why if you look at our record of what we've been able to achieve, we've moved the needle in these areas. But you need that at the state level because you need to be able to hit the ground running at this very critical moment. So I ask for your support, I ask for your vote, and I ask you to go look at our website. Thank you for doing this forum.
Thank you very, very much. So I want to simply close our remarks in this forum at this stage by just saying a huge thank you to everyone who participated today in one way or another. I want to give a big shout out and round of applause to Reed Temple AME Church, especially to the James A. Parker Lay Organization Social Action Committee. I want to give acknowledgments to Lynette and to Kayla and to Nikki and for the entire committee, for the thoughtful questions and organization of the forum. It takes a lot to put these kinds of forum together. To all the people who are working backstage to make this presentation delivered seamlessly, I might add, I want to say thank you to you. And then a huge, huge thank you and congratulations to each of the candidates who are putting yourselves forward. The passion that you're demonstrating, it comes through your commitment to cause and to the state and to the issues that you spoke about really, really ring true in so many ways and so many levels. And your experience are each commendable. So I just want to thank you for putting yourselves out there as servants to those of us who live in the state of Maryland. At this point, I want to, again, thank the audience for your participation, as well for tuning in and listening to these critical issues that are facing us in this community. And so without further remarks from me, I want to transition this conversation over to Lynette Cosby, who is the chair of the Social Action Committee. Over to you, Lynette.
Thank you, Tonia, and thank you so much for moderating this event. It has been wonderful. Again, my name is Lynette Cosby. I am the Social Action Chair for the James A. Parker Lay Organization and Reed Temple AME Church. We want to thank you for coming out today, for watching this live wherever you are. Of course, we're going to thank our pastor, Reverend Dr. Mark Whitlock. He is a wonderful leader for allowing us this opportunity, and Reverend Mia for being his backbone and for helping us to stay straight at Reed Temple. We thank you so much for your leadership. I want to also thank the James A. Parker Lay Organization leadership and members for your support and for this opportunity to serve you all. And we are grateful to be able to put this forum on. We're going to be thinking about doing another running of these, the same programs again, and they're also going to be available on Facebook, YouTube, and the Reed Temple webpage to make sure that that you can see these before the primary elections. This is helpful to make your decisions, and it is crucial that you vote and let your voice be heard, because it is a critical moment and a pivotal moment for Maryland, for Prince George's County, and for all of us here. So your vote is your voice, and you have to vote. If you're not registered, you can take a look at our website, reedtemple.org/events. Go to the Voting Blitz campaign. There you will have everything that you need to register to vote. Check your registration to make sure everything is straight, your party affiliation, your address, whatever. Know where your polling place is. If you want to do a mail-in ballot, or if you want to vote an absentee ballot, if you need to vote an absentee ballot, and if you need anything before the primary, you have until the end of the month, June 28th, to update your registration or to register if you want to vote in the primary. And as we talked about earlier, we did this intentionally this month for this forum and the next forum to talk about the primary, because Maryland is a closed primary. You have to vote in the party that you're affiliated with for the candidates. So that's why we separated them out, so that you would know who was Republican, who is Democrat. So whatever affiliation that you have, you know who to choose from. It is imperative that you choose, because if you don't, this narrows down who is going to be the person in the general election. So you have to vote now, and you have to vote again in the general election. So we want to make sure that you're covered. So again, I'm going to always end with my favorite voting right activist quote from her, Fannie Lou Hamer. She says, "You can pray until you faint, but unless you get up and try to do something, God is not going to put it in your lap." It is up to us to take advantage of the opportunity and our civil right to vote in the next election. We will hopefully see you next week at our next forum, which is Saturday, June the 11th. Those will be the congressional representative candidates for District 4, and that's in partnership with the Iota Gamma Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha. We look forward to seeing you next week, and that'll be our final forum. And thank you so much for coming. Have a good day.